Archaeologists often find the remains of ancient warriors with horrific wounds from swords and spears. But what if I told you? That wasn't the real horror. We've grown accustomed to thinking that enemy weapons were the primary threat in antiquity. But the shocking reality of the Roman army's long campaigns was far more terrifying, far more brutal, and far more silent. Often, the real killer of legionaries was simply a winter sleep. On the freezing, merciless ground, the Roman army spent enormous resources on logistics in equipping its soldiers. However, when temperatures dropped below freezing, even this advanced military machine began to falter. A modern person would hardly survive even a couple of nights in such conditions. Yet, the Romans didn't just survive in that icy hell. They dominated, they conquered, they won. Today, you're about to discover something chilling. We'll talk about how sleep itself turned into a form of torture. You'll learn why a shield was more important than a mattress, and how a simple campfire could become a death sentence. It sounds insane, but this is exactly how one of the greatest empires in history was built. Let's uncover the brutal, untold truth about the winter sleep of an ordinary Roman soldier. Imagine a typical war hundreds of years before our era. The first snow falls, and armies literally disappear, retreating to safety. Fighting in winter was considered pure suicide, even for the fiercest tribes. But the Romans, they broke every rule. They believed weakness was a choice. Why did heavy military campaigns continue even in the bitterest cold? Roman generals realized one brutally clever thing. If the enemy thinks you won't attack, that's exactly when you strike. Winter became their deadliest weapon. The barbarians relaxed unguarded, confident that nature itself would protect them. And then suddenly, on the horizon, appeared frozen, exhausted, but terrifyingly determined men. The surprise was devastating. Modern armies use snowmobiles and heated helicopters. The Romans had none of that. Only their feet, their discipline, and their unstoppable endurance. Marching knee-deep in snow drained insane amounts of energy. Legionaries often burned more strength fighting the cold than fighting the enemy itself. Commanders knew the risks. Entire units could be wiped out by frostbite alone. But Roman strategy was ruthless. Victory mattered more than lives. To keep moving, soldiers had to literally carve roads through snow. Engineering units worked for hours clearing paths, while freezing winds cut through their bodies. And after that, they still had to fight. Supply wagons got stuck. Animals died. Soldiers carried everything themselves up to 40 kilograms. Imagine that. Modern hikers complain about 15 kg backpacks with high-tech gear. A Roman carried armor, weapons, food, and camp equipment while wearing sandals. Yes, sandals. Caligae perfect for dry terrain, turned into instruments of torture in snow and ice. Soldiers stuffed them with wool and straw just to avoid freezing. This was survival, not comfort. This was war against nature itself, and the Romans mastered it. After marching 30 kilometers in freezing winds, completely exhausted, starving, and in pain, a modern human would collapse into a warm bed. A Roman soldier. He collapsed onto frozen earth. Leather tents were heavy and often froze solid. Even when set up, they barely protected against the deadly cold rising from the ground. Because here's the real danger. The ground steals your heat faster than the air. This is called conductive heat loss. The body warms the ground, but the ground never warms back. It just drains you until you die. Romans didn't know the science, but they knew the outcome. Death. So they adapted. Branches, leaves, even thorny bushes became insulation. A thin layer between life and death. Sleep wasn't rest anymore. It was a nightly battle. Constant shivering, painful cramps, endless waking. By morning, their bodies were broken, joints screaming in pain. And yet, they stood up, grabbed their shields, and marched to war again. Exhaustion built up day after day. Eventually, soldiers stopped thinking. They moved on pure instinct. Some simply collapsed, never to rise again. Modern science shows sleep deprivation is like being drunk. Now imagine an entire army, exhausted, freezing, barely conscious, still fighting, and somehow winning. Discipline was the only thing holding everything together. Centurions forced soldiers to wake up, sometimes violently, because sleeping too long meant death. Brutal, but necessary, because in that freezing darkness, giving up meant dying. Now here's where it gets even more intense. A Roman soldier didn't have modern winter gear. No insulated jackets, no sleeping bags. His only protection, a simple wool cloak called the sagum. It looked ordinary, but it was life-saving. Wool retains heat even when wet. This ancient material became their shield against death itself. The sagum was soaked in animal fat to make it waterproof. It smelled horrible, but it worked. At night, soldiers wrapped themselves tightly in it, creating a desperate cocoon of warmth. But it wasn't enough. Their legs often remained exposed to freezing air, so they curled into tight positions just to survive. Sleep was short, broken, painful. Sometimes the cloak froze to the ground. In the morning they had to rip it free. If it tore, that could mean death. That's why soldiers valued their cloaks more than their weapons. Because a sword wins battles, but a cloak keeps you alive. Then came the shield, the legendary scutum. By day it blocked weapons. By night it became a bed. Wood insulated better than frozen earth. Soldiers slept on their shields, avoiding deadly heat loss. Uncomfortable, absolutely. Necessary, completely. Sometimes they even built shelters using shields, forming crude structures against wind and snow. It was genius born from desperation. But survival wasn't just about equipment. It was about brotherhood. The contubernium, groups of 8 soldiers, shared everything, including warmth. They slept pressed together, body against body, creating heat like a human furnace. 8 men generating enough warmth to survive the night. Positions rotated constantly. The outer men froze as the inner ones stayed warm. It was brutal, but it worked. This bond made them unstoppable. They didn't fight as individuals. They fought as one. And then the fire. It seems like the perfect solution, right? Warmth, light, comfort. Wrong. Fire was dangerous. It revealed your position to the enemy. A single flame could attract death from miles away. That's why fires were often forbidden. Soldiers had to eat cold food, sleep freezing, all to stay hidden. If fires were allowed, they were carefully hidden in pits, reducing visibility. Even then, it was risky. Too close and you could burn. Too far and you froze. Survival became a deadly balance. And the worst part, night watch, standing still in freezing winds, unable to move, for hours. Roman nights were divided into shifts. Guards relied on water clocks or stars to measure time, falling asleep on duty. Unforgivable, punishable by death, often carried out by fellow soldiers, because one mistake could destroy the entire army. To stay awake, soldiers did extreme things, biting their lips, rubbing snow on their faces. Some even stabbed themselves just to stay conscious. Pain was better than death. And all this, before battle even began. They entered combat already exhausted, freezing, barely functional. But still they fought. Still they won, because the Roman army wasn't built on comfort. It was built on endurance, on discipline, on suffering. Their greatest enemy wasn't always the enemy. It was the cold, the exhaustion, the endless nights without sleep. And yet, they endured what would break any modern army. They slept in mud, in snow, on wood, in iron armor. They froze, starved, suffered. But they never stopped. Because in the end, victory doesn't belong to the strongest. It belongs to the one who can suffer the longest. And that is how Rome conquered the world. But what you're about to hear next is where survival turns into pure horror. Because cold alone wasn't the deadliest enemy. It was wetness. The silent killer. When snow melted on their bodies, their clothes became soaked with icy water. And here's the terrifying truth. Wet cold kills faster than freezing air. Roman soldiers didn't have spare dry clothes. They marched, fought, and slept in the same soaked tunics for days, sometimes weeks. Imagine that feeling, cold water clinging to your skin, draining your body heat every second. No escape, no relief, just slow, relentless suffering. This led to one of the most horrifying conditions in ancient warfare, rotting feet. Long before modern wars, Roman soldiers suffered from what we now call trench foot. Their feet swelled, turned dark, and began to decay inside their own sandals. Yes, decay. Alive, step by step, they were literally walking on dying flesh. And there was nothing they could do. Roman medics were skilled, they could stitch wounds, remove arrows, but against cold, infection, and rot, they were helpless. And then came disease. Pneumonia spread like wildfire in those cramped, damp tents. One soldier coughs, and within days, the entire unit is sick, coughing fever, weakness. And still they had to march. Still they had to fight, because stopping was not an option. The Roman army never stopped. The weak were left behind. The strong kept moving. This wasn't just an army. It was natural selection in motion. To fight the cold, soldiers rubbed their bodies with olive oil. A thin protective layer, trapping heat, but it came with a price. Dirt, sweat, grime sticking to their skin. Hygiene collapsed. Diseases spread. And yet, they endured. Even basic human needs became dangerous. Stepping outside the camp at night, even for a moment, could mean freezing or death. So sickness spread even faster. Dysentery, fever, infection. The camp turned into a nightmare of coughing, pain, and silent suffering. But the most shocking part, even after marching all day, freezing, starving, exhausted beyond limits, they still weren't allowed to rest. Every single night, they had to build a fortified camp. Yes, build. Digging trenches, raising walls, in frozen ground that felt like stone. Shovels bent, hands tore open, muscles screamed. But the work continued, because without defenses, they wouldn't survive the night. This wasn't optional. This was survival. And here's the genius behind it. That brutal labor warmed their bodies before sleep. It gave them just enough heat to actually fall asleep. Even suffering was turned into strategy. That's what made Rome unstoppable. Even commanders weren't immune. Lack of sleep destroyed judgment. A tired general could lose an entire war. But Roman soldiers were trained differently. They didn't rely on thinking. They relied on instinct, repetition, discipline, muscle memory. Even half asleep, they could still fight, still kill, still win. Some even built shelters from snow itself, small caves that trapped heat inside. Primitive, but effective. Because in the end, it wasn't technology that made them powerful. It was adaptation, relentless, brutal adaptation. The Roman army didn't just fight enemies. It fought nature itself. And it won. Think about that for a second. No heaters, no modern gear, no comfort. Just cold darkness, pain, and willpower. Their strength didn't come from weapons. It came from endurance, from the ability to suffer longer than anyone else. Because in ancient warfare, the one who survives the night wins the war. And the Romans, they didn't just survive, they mastered it. That's the truth history rarely shows you. No glory. No heroic music. Just freezing men, lying in the dirt, praying to see the sunrise. And when they did, they stood up, picked up their weapons, and conquered the world.